You're off the project until you publicly apologize to my ex-husband. That was my wife. My wife saying that in front of 87 employees in the middle of the quarterly all hands. The room went so quiet, I could hear someone's coffee drip into its lid. I just stared at her, blinking once. She stood at the podium like she was delivering a sermon on company values. Her red blazer matched the flare of indignation she wore like perfume lately. And her ex-husband, yes, the same guy who once forgot to return my car with brakes intact, was leaning against the wall, arms crossed, wearing a smile like he'd already moved into my side of the bed. Let me back up. 2 months ago, Caroline got promoted to CFO. I was happy for her, genuinely. She's smart, ambitious, the kind of woman who made sure we had 2 retirement accounts before we even had a dog. But after she got that title, something cracked. The late nights got later. The smirks got colder. And suddenly, her ex, Wes, was back in the picture. Not romantically, of course. No, that would have been too obvious. He was brought on as a strategic consultant for the software overhaul, which was funny since I'd built that system myself from the ground up 15 years ago, back when Wes was still Googling how to install Java. So when I called out a blatant security flaw in Wes's proposal during a prior meeting calmly with data, he called it a tone issue. Caroline called it disruptive. And now here we were, live on Zoom, with 87 faces watching like it was the end of a bad reality show. This company won't tolerate that kind of disrespect, she said, practically trembling with moral superiority. Either you apologize publicly or you're off the project. It wasn't just a line in the sand. It was a slap across the face. And the fact that she used this company like she hadn't been married to me for 20 years made it all the more poetic. I glanced at Wes. He winked, and I nodded. Just once. Calm. The room didn't know what to do with that. Caroline didn't either. She paused like she expected a tantrum, an argument, maybe a grandstanding monologue. But I gave her nothing. She blinked, smoothed her blazer, and moved on with the slides. That's the thing about public humiliation. It's not always loud. Sometimes it's surgical, controlled, like she rehearsed it in her head every night while I snored beside her. But she made one mistake. She did it publicly. And because she made it public, I will too. Hey, if you're still here reading and the story is pulling you in even a little, do us a solid and hit the subscribe button. More than 90% of people don't, and it kind of hurts, not gonna lie. But that tiny click really keeps the team grinding harder. Thanks. Anyway, when the meeting ended, people filed out in silence. A few gave me sympathetic glances. Most avoided eye contact like I had something contagious. I stayed seated until the last person left. Then I stood, adjusted the sleeve of my jacket, and walked straight to my office. The good thing about being underestimated is no one watches you closely. They think silence means defeat. That nod I gave her, she'll replay that in her head later and mistake it for submission. But it wasn't. It was permission. Permission for myself to finally stop pretending. When I shut the door behind me, I didn't slam it. I locked it quietly, sat down at my desk, and opened the bottom drawer. Inside was a manila folder I hadn't touched in 10 years. Slightly yellowed at the edges, still sealed. Handwritten on the tab in fine-tip black pen. KB exit provisions. IP segregation. KB stood for Kevin Berger, the original founder, the guy who left abruptly before Wes ever showed up. No one really knew why he left. But I did. And so did Caroline. Though she pretended not to. Kevin and I had made a pact that day, one we never spoke of again. I pulled out the folder, broke the seal, and slid the document out. The paper was stiff. At the bottom of the page, right above the notary stamp, were Kevin's initials, faint but still there, watermarked like a ghost under the contract text. Clause 9. In the event that David R. Stern is removed from any project by executive directive under personal conflict, this clause may be activated to trigger intellectual property reassessment and withdrawal rights, retroactively and without prejudice. It was unsigned, by design. Kevin wanted a paper trail that could be pulled or buried, depending on how things played out. Just in case they forget who built the foundation, he said, or decide they don't need you once the furniture's in. They forgot. And Caroline? She didn't just forget. She used it as a weapon. In front of my engineers, My interns, my legacy, that wasn't a CFO flex. That was a declaration of war with confetti on top. I picked up my phone and dialed a number I hadn't used in 5 years. Barrow Legal Group, the voice answered. Hi, this is David Stern. I need to activate a time-stamped copy of Clause 9 in the Berger MOU. A pause, then a low breath. Are you sure? I looked out the window. Caroline was standing outside talking to Wes, laughing, gesturing animatedly. She made this personal, I said. Now it's just business. The thing about Caroline, she always underestimated silence. She thought restraint was weakness, that calm was surrender, which was ironic, given how she used to admire that about me. You're the only man I've ever met who doesn't flinch, she once told me on our 5th anniversary, drunk on Pinot and flattery. I love how still you get when you're mad, like you're sharpening something inside. Turns out, she wasn't wrong. I do sharpen things, just not always knives. After the call to Barrow Legal, I sat still for exactly 11 minutes. I counted them, let the weight of the moment sink in, then stood up, folder in hand, and walked to the filing cabinet no one had touched since our first product launch. Third drawer. Behind the tax records and early pitch decks was another envelope, thicker, red wax seal cracked but intact. Inside, drafts of the code-based schematic I'd written by hand, the original one. Long before Caroline convinced me to digitize everything and move it onto the company cloud, that was the year she started suggesting we bring Wes on board. That man's name should have never made it into our boardroom. But Caroline, she said he was reformed, said he'd gotten help. He was just a brilliant mind stuck in a broken time. That line stuck with me because Wes wasn't brilliant, he was opportunistic. A man who could sell ice to a snowman, sure, but couldn't write a clean loop if his life depended on it. And now, after everything, she brought him back, planted him at my table, and made me apologize to him for what? Catching a logic hole so wide you could park her Audi in it? I slid the red-sealed folder next to the manila one. One was memory, the other was strategy. Together, they were leverage. When I activated Clause 9, I knew what it would trigger. Kevin, our original founder, had been paranoid in all the right ways. He saw the cracks before anyone else did. The board wanted polish. Investors wanted pitch decks and smiling white guys on stage. But Kevin? He just wanted the tech to work. So when he left, quietly and without ceremony, he gave me something no one else knew about, the rights to any foundational IP I developed solo before his resignation was formalized. Caroline didn't know that. Or maybe she forgot. Clause 9 was specific. Should David R. Stern be publicly removed or demoted from a project due to personal conflict, all intellectual property registered in his sole name prior to April 2014 reverts back to him. And here's the thing. They never purchased it. They licensed it in quarterly renewals because back then, we didn't want to inflate the balance sheet with long-term assets. Caroline made that call herself. Said we should keep flexibility. Irony tastes like blood sometimes. The voice from Barrow Legal called back at 4:12 p.m. Direct line. We've initiated the timestamp. Confirmed. Clause 9 will be logged and notified to the compliance register within 24 hours. Any contact from them yet, I asked. Not yet, but once compliance alerts internal counsel, the CFO will be the first notified. I smiled. Then I'll set my watch. I didn't go home that night. Instead, I walked the empty halls of the office, stopped by old workstations, the early dev lab where the prototype was built on borrowed parts and vending machine caffeine. There was still a crack in the drywall where Kevin threw a wrench in frustration one night. Funny, the things that stay behind. Marks, code, rights. Around midnight, I opened our internal dev vault. My credentials still worked, of course. They wouldn't revoke them until legal told them to, and that wouldn't happen until morning. So I ran a soft pull on all current deployments using my original architecture. The number was higher than I expected. 9 modules, 6 environments, 3 client-facing frameworks, all using core logic authored by me before Caroline ever convinced me to move in with her, let alone move the IP onto shared infrastructure. Every line was tagged, every tag was dated, and every date, pre-2014, I copied nothing, transferred nothing. I didn't need to. Clause 9 wasn't about possession, it was about ownership. And now that the clause was live, everything they built on top of my work was sitting on legal ice, one subpoena away from becoming inadmissible in any investor pitch or customer briefing. And the best part, I hadn't said a word publicly, no grand farewell, no leaked memo, just silence, stillness, like Caroline used to love. The last thing I did before leaving the building was pull out a sticky note and write one word: recalibrating. I stuck it to the inside of my now empty office door. She'd find it in the morning. Maybe she'd think it was some passive-aggressive jab. Maybe she'd show it to Wes and they'd laugh. Or maybe, just maybe, it would hit her that she'd said the one name that should have stayed buried, not mine, Kevin's, because when that name resurfaces, everything comes with it. The clauses, the caveats, the signatures, and the parts of me she thought she'd already erased. I didn't write a resignation letter. I engineered it. Every sentence was a scalpel, no fluffed-up gratitude, no burned bridges, no long-winded odes to growth or new chapters, just legally phrased disengagement with the kind of cold clarity that makes HR departments reach for their aspirin. To whom it may concern, effective immediately, I am resigning from my position as Senior Technical Architect. This resignation is made in accordance with the provisions of Clause 9 in the Berger MOU and is contingent upon the legal reversion of proprietary frameworks developed under independent capacity. Attached was a multi-page addendum, a timestamped notarized inventory of every line of code, framework, utility library, and back-end scaffolding I built personally, under the segregated IP registration Kevin and I agreed on. It even included a machine learning model I wrote on a whim over Thanksgiving in 2013 while Caroline was in Michigan visiting her sister. She thought I spent the weekend binge watching old war movies. In reality, I was writing a predictive engine that their flagship platform now runs on. Each item on the list was tagged with its original repo checksum, my personal signature hash, and dates of creation. Ironclad, legal, no room for interpretation. At the bottom of the letter, a single paragraph in bold. Note: the company's failure to formally absorb these frameworks into ownership through acquisition, purchase, or mutual agreement preserves my legal right to retract all use, access, and derivative development, effective upon activation of Clause 9. No emotion, just architecture. Of systems. Of exits, I printed 2 copies, placed one neatly on the center of my desk under a smooth black paperweight shaped like a Mobius strip, a gift from Caroline 5 years ago, back when we still pretended we didn't see through each other. The second copy I slid into a pre-labeled envelope addressed to the firm representing the company's external compliance counsel. Certified mail, return receipt requested. A digital duplicate would follow in the morning with timestamp confirmation. No room for lost papers or we never got that nonsense. At 2:13 a.m., I opened my desk drawer for the last time, cleared the drawer methodically. One blue stress ball, a pen with no ink, a mug from our first trade show in Austin. Caroline broke the other one in a fight, said it was an ugly reminder. I left the mug, then the photos. There was only one now, tucked behind the monitor. It wasn't of Caroline or the team. It was me and Kevin, 15 years ago, standing next to a server rack we'd built ourselves out of scrap Dell towers and borrowed processors. He had written Frankenstein Lives in Sharpie across the top. We were grinning, sweaty, stupidly proud. I packed it carefully. The whiteboard on the wall still had my handwriting on it. Half-solved algorithm from a week ago. I wiped it clean, slow, and quiet. Not because I was erasing anything, but because I knew what came next would redraw everything in ink they couldn't wipe off. At 3:01 a.m., I turned off the lights, locked the office door behind me, not out of sentiment but habit, the kind of habit that builds over decades of caring too much. I passed Caroline's glass-walled corner office on the way out. Her desk was cluttered with finance binders, lipstick-stained coffee cups, and that photo of her and Wes at some award dinner last fall. I remember that night. She told me it was just a networking event. She came home 3 hours late smelling like unfamiliar cologne and mint gum. I didn't ask. I was still building. And now she can have the desk, but not the foundation. Security was dozing in the front lobby. I nodded to the kid, who startled awake and smiled nervously. He didn't ask questions. No one ever does when the man walking out is wearing a calm face and carrying nothing but a coat and a locked briefcase. Outside, the air was cold and clean. My car waited in the far corner of the lot. Under the flickering floodlight no one had ever gotten around to fixing. I liked that spot. Dark, private. I sat behind the wheel, engine off, and watched the building for a moment. Not out of nostalgia, but strategy. I had just removed the keystone. They didn't know it yet, but the arch was about to crumble. Let Wes try to hold it up. Let Caroline pretend it's still functional. Tomorrow they'll see an empty desk and think it's just another departure, but soon, very soon, they'll realize what I actually took. And when that happens, no apology will be enough. Caroline walked into the office like she owned the building, which, in her head, she probably did. Her heels clicked a little louder that morning, her coffee order came extra foamy, and her smile, well, it was the kind of smirk you wear when you think the chessboard is finally yours. She breezed past the intern cubicles, nodded curtly at a few engineers, and glanced toward my office. Empty. Not, oh, maybe he's in a meeting. Empty. Stripped bare. Lights off. Whiteboard wiped. Chair pushed in. Only one thing sat on the desk. The letter. At first, she didn't flinch, just sipped her coffee with one hand and picked up the envelope with the other like it was a parking ticket she'd contest later. She flipped it open. Read, blinked, read again. A tiny twitch pulled at the edge of her smirk. The paperweight was gone. That, more than anything, probably unnerved her. Then the door burst open. Victor Abrams, the company's external legal counsel, didn't usually run. He was a man whose entire brand revolved around calm, expensive pauses and the smell of teakwood cologne. But today he looked like he'd seen a ghost, and the ghost had paperwork. He didn't bother with greetings. "Caroline," he gasped, "please tell me you didn't remove David publicly." She raised an eyebrow. "Excuse me?" "At the all hands," Victor said. "Did you formally announce his removal from the software overhaul in front of staff?" She straightened, defensive already. "I told him to apologize or step aside." "In front of a group," he interrupted. "Witnessed, recorded, streamed to multiple satellite offices." "Yes," she snapped. "What's your point?" Victor slammed a folder onto the conference table with the kind of force that says, "I warned you, but you didn't listen." Inside, a copy of the Clause 9 activation memo, time-stamped, signed, countersigned by Barrow Legal, and verified by the original MOU attached in full. "This," he said flatly, "is your point." She stared at the page like it had personally insulted her. "No, he can't do that. That clause was never signed." Victor gave her a tired look. He didn't have to sign it. The MOU was executed by Kevin Berger before his departure. The IP clause defaulted to David upon Kevin's withdrawal, and because no acquisition or override was filed since "we integrated the systems," she barked. "We used his frameworks. That counts as absorption." Victor just shook his head. "You use them under license. Annual renewals. No conversion agreement was ever finalized. Which means what, Victor?" she snapped. He sighed. "It means everything built on top of David's original infrastructure, every platform, every module, every deployment tied to that code base is now in breach of usage." She went still, and then she laughed, that cold, clipped laugh she used to use when someone challenged her in a boardroom and she didn't yet know how to respond. "He doesn't have the guts," she muttered. "He's bluffing. He's too sentimental. I know him." Victor pointed at the document again. "Then you don't know him anymore." Silence. "Then he left a letter on my desk," she said suddenly, voice low. "Procedural. Cold. I thought he was being dramatic." Victor stepped forward. "No, he was being surgical. And now we have a compliance nightmare." She leaned on the table, both hands bracing her as if the steel frame could hold her ego together. "Can we reverse this?" "No," Victor said simply, "not without court action. And even then, his documentation predates yours. He has logs, repo hashes, author timestamps. He sent the full inventory to our compliance team and the IP office. He didn't just resign, he dismantled the foundation. Wes can replicate the system," she said quickly, as if the words themselves could build code. "We'll rebuild." Victor didn't answer, just gave her that look, the one professionals reserve for people who are about to be very, very disappointed. She looked down again at the letter. "Read the last paragraph." Her lips moved as she mouthed the words. "This resignation is made in accordance with Clause 9. Contingent upon the legal reversion of proprietary frameworks developed under independent capacity." Her hands trembled, just a little. Then her phone buzzed. One new email. Subject line, "IP separation trigger acknowledged." Sender, "Barrow Legal." Timestamp, 7:42 a.m. Attached, a formal alert to internal counsel. outlining that access to any products using the retracted code base must be frozen until legal review is complete. Victor read over her shoulder and closed his eyes. It's already live. She collapsed into the chair, silent. And somewhere, in a nearby office with a window view and no nameplate yet, Wes was probably sipping his second coffee, blissfully unaware that the floor beneath him wasn't just cracked. It was missing. The emergency leadership meeting was called for 9 o'clock a.m. sharp. Caroline made sure of it. She barked the invite across Slack like it was a fire alarm. Executive roundtable, no exceptions. Board welcome. The agenda, project continuity plan. But that was corporate code for what the hell just happened, and how fast can we pretend it didn't? Wes arrived first, of course. Sleeves rolled, smug grin dialed up, the human version of a whiteboard doodle that thinks it's a blueprint. He strolled in like he'd been waiting for this moment, the hero of the hour, the man with solutions. I can rebuild the system, he announced before anyone sat down. It's just code. We'll rewrite it, bring in a few contractors. Couple weeks of chaos, sure, but we'll stabilize. Caroline seized on it like a life raft. Exactly. We pivot, we spin it. Clients will never know the difference. Victor, the lawyer, walked in just then with a tablet under one arm and the expression of a man arriving late to his own funeral. He said nothing at first, just took a seat at the far end of the table and started pulling up files. The CTO, Mina, joined next. She didn't sit, just hovered in the doorway, arms crossed. We can't access the code, she said flatly. Caroline blinked. What? The core folders, Mina clarified. Everything from Framework Alpha to Delta, locked out. Admin credentials revoked. Caroline looked at Wes. Wes shrugged. We'll bypass it. I know how he thinks. He's old school. Probably left some backdoor access I can crack. Victor finally looked up. You won't. Excuse me? Wes frowned. Victor tapped the screen in front of him. Clause 9 includes IP lockout terms enforceable upon activation. The folders were protected by a legal key escrow. David didn't lock you out. He paused. Barrow Legal did. The room went still. Then the head of internal audit, Amir, entered holding a folder that looked like it weighed more than his laptop. His voice was low and apologetic. Caroline, he said carefully, we finished reviewing David's documentation. It's thorough. He filed for retroactive IP separation under the Berger carve-out clause. Not just the framework code either. Any derivative work based on his models is frozen pending review. Caroline scoffed. You're telling me everything we built in the last 5 years is unusable? Amir's pause was answer enough. A junior board member, freshly minted and far too earnest for his own good, cleared his throat nervously. I'm sorry to ask, but did we ever formally purchase David's original IP? I mean, through acquisition, equity deal, contract? All eyes turned to Caroline. She opened her mouth, closed it. Silence. The junior board member blinked. So, no? Victor looked like he was physically holding himself back from saying, I told you so. Wes finally lost the grin. Wait, are you saying we can't even deploy patches? Bug fixes? Updates? Not without risking litigation, Amir said. Any change could be interpreted as derivative work. But it's our product now, Caroline insisted, her voice tight, louder. No, Victor said gently, like he was explaining gravity to a child. It's built on a product that isn't yours. You used it under a renewable license. That license was revoked. This is not your land. You just built a house on it. Caroline stood. Then we take it down. Brick by brick, we start over. Strip out every line of his code. Rewrite from scratch. We'll just replace it. Mina raised an eyebrow. With what? We have zero documentation for 7% of his early code. You think it's spaghetti, but it's jazz. And the people who understood it? They left with him, Amir said quietly. Wes sat back in his chair, suddenly paler. We can't even fork the repo, can we? No, Victor said. You'd be forking a locked asset. Another silence. Heavier this time, like the floor had shifted under them, and no one wanted to say it out loud. Caroline turned to the wall of windows behind her. From there you could see the city skyline. The gleaming tower that housed one of their biggest clients was visible across the street. That client's system ran entirely on the retracted frameworks. How long before they notice? She asked. Victor didn't answer. Mina did. If they deploy a routine update, 48 hours. Tops. Caroline's hands tightened into fists. Okay, fine. What's the cost to litigate? Victor smiled without humor. Litigating IP reversion against a founder who never relinquished ownership and his time-stamped authorship, you'd be lighting money on fire for the privilege of losing slowly. The junior board member tried to help. Maybe we issue a press release, say we're transitioning platforms, put a spin on it. Caroline didn't answer, because for the first time, there was nothing to spin. David hadn't just left. He'd taken the floorboards, the wiring, the blueprints, and now every step they took echoed. Outside, the city buzzed on. Cars honked, phones buzzed, business as usual. But inside that room was stillness. Not the kind David used to wear like armor, the other kind, the kind that comes when you realize the silence is yours now and you've got no one left to blame. The boardroom felt like a holding cell. No jokes, no small talk, no pastries from that overpriced catering firm Caroline insisted on. Just 10 people with tight jaws, all pretending the company's marrow hadn't just been scooped out and handed to someone walking away in total silence. The private session was called under the guise of strategic review, but everyone knew what it really was. Triage. No one said David's name, not yet, like it was a conjuring spell. But the tension said it for them. Every minute that passed without access to the systems just drove the point deeper. He wasn't gone. He was winning. And then the door opened. He walked in like he'd never left. Kevin Berger, the founder, the ghost. Most of the board had only heard stories about him back in the early days when the product was duct taped together with caffeine and brute force. But for those who'd been around long enough to remember, the sight of Kevin in the flesh was like a time bomb with a slow, deliberate tick. Gray at the temples now, no tie, no watch, just a manila envelope under his arm, and that same dry, permanent squint like everything he looked at had already disappointed him once before. He didn't sit, didn't wait. Just walked to the head of the table, dropped the envelope with a flat thud and said, David asked me to deliver this. Caroline stiffened. Wes, who for some reason was allowed to attend the session despite not holding an actual executive title, rolled his eyes. Oh, great, Wes muttered. Let me guess. Another one of David's magic tricks. He always did like dramatic exits. Kevin didn't even turn toward him. He opened the envelope slowly, like he was peeling back the skin of something long buried. Inside, a document that had once lived in a drawer nobody had touched in nearly a decade. Cream paper, crisp edges, signatures in blue ink, a gold notary seal at the bottom. This, Kevin said, is the original auxiliary exit agreement, executed in 2015, not revoked, never superseded. Caroline leaned forward. That's not binding. It was drafted during transition. You left before the current board was in place. Kevin looked her dead in the eye. I didn't leave. I stepped aside. There's a difference. He pointed to the document. Clause 7C, triggered automatically if David is subject to public humiliation by a member of executive leadership. In the event that clause is triggered, all reversionary IP rights revert instantly, with board authority bypassed. The silence in the room cracked like ice underfoot. Wait, one of the board members said slowly. You wrote an exit clause triggered by public humiliation? Kevin nodded. Because of him. He didn't even gesture. Just looked directly at Wes, who now visibly tensed. Back then, Kevin continued, Wes wasn't a consultant. He was a walking HR file. And I knew that if he ever came near this company again, someone would get hurt. So David and I built in a firewall, a tripwire, something that would activate only if leadership ever got so stupid or so arrogant that they publicly compromised his position. Wes scoffed. That's ridiculous. No court would take that seriously. Kevin raised an eyebrow. It's not written for the court. It's written for the register, and it was filed, notarized, cross-referenced in David's employee agreement and in the foundational charter. He tapped the gold seal. It's active. The board looked at one another. Someone finally asked, why didn't anyone flag this during due diligence? Kevin shrugged. Because no one ever asked. Everyone assumed the old stuff was just ceremonial. But David didn't. He understood what we built. Every clause, every trapdoor, every back-end fallback. Caroline, for once, had no words. Her mouth opened, then closed again. Wes tried to regain ground. Okay, let's say this clause is valid. He still walked away. He quit. Kevin turned slowly to face him. No, he didn't quit. He withdrew. There's a legal difference, Wes, though I wouldn't expect you to understand nuance. You always liked shortcuts, and Caroline always let you take them. Caroline flushed. Kevin stepped back from the table, letting the silence settle. I'm not staying, he said, just here to confirm delivery. But I will say this. You all let your egos write checks your IP can't cash. You didn't lose a coder. You lost your spine. With that, he turned and left. The door clicked shut behind him. No one moved, no one spoke. Because David wasn't in the room, but every corner of it felt like him, the wiring, the documents, the silence, even the panic. Wes finally muttered, "That clause is a relic." "No," a board member whispered, staring at the document like it was a death notice. "That clause is a gun, and we just heard it go off." It started with one resignation email, then two. By the time the fifth engineer quit, Caroline still hadn't responded to the first. The subject lines were all identical. Professional transition notice. No dramatic goodbyes. No postmortems. Just clinical, professional exits that hit like a sniper's bullets. Clean, quick, and precisely aimed. They didn't post farewell messages on Slack. Didn't bring cupcakes. Just left their badges on their desks and walked out. The first to go was Arun, quiet back-end genius, barely spoken meetings, but the code base sang when his fingers touched it. Then Mira, the data pipeline lead, who once pulled a 32-hour shift to rescue a corrupted client node. She left a 3-line email, no punctuation. Then Joel, then Serena, then Lee. By Friday, the dev floor felt like a shell. The chairs weren't empty, they were absent. You could feel the air shift. Caroline called a meeting, not an all hands. Just her, Wes, and HR, flanked by a few frantic junior managers trying to look calm while their project dependencies evaporated by the hour. "They're leaving for a competitor," Wes announced confidently, flipping through LinkedIn like he was solving the mystery one profile at a time. "They're not," Mina, the CTO, cut in. "I checked. No active offers from known rivals. No startup poaching. No M&A rumors." "Then where the hell are they going?" Caroline snapped. Victor, who had silently joined in the corner of the room like he always did when things got legal, finally looked up from his notes. "You already know where they're going." Caroline glared. "He doesn't even have a company. There's no entity, no funding, no product." Victor smiled faintly. "Doesn't matter. He has them. That's the product." HR tried to spin it. Exit interviews cited new challenges, alignment in family time, but it was the same pattern, quiet, decisive, coordinated, and still, David hadn't said a single word. No LinkedIn post, no tweet, no press leak, no comment, just a name that moved silently through whisper networks, DMs, and shared glances. He hadn't reached out to anyone. He didn't have to. They reached out to him. Because loyalty doesn't dissolve. It migrates. They remembered who stayed late when the systems went dark, who covered for their first production error without condescension, who built the framework that just worked, not Wes. Never Wes, and certainly not Caroline, who once laughed in a strategy meeting that engineers are just expensive calculators. The sting of that comment hadn't left. Some wrote it off as a joke, but jokes only land when the room's on your side. And Caroline's room was getting smaller by the day. Now she was calling department heads into cramped stand-ups that felt more like interrogations, asking who had been in contact with David. Nobody answered, not because they were afraid, because they didn't owe her anything anymore. They knew she'd tried to humiliate him. They watched her smirk while Wes rolled his eyes in front of the team. They saw the way David just nodded, silent, and then he disappeared. Not with a bang, no inbox bombshell, no grandstanding speech. He just walked away. And now he was building again, not in public, not in glass conference rooms or panel discussions or newsletter announcements, but somewhere. They didn't know where, but they could feel it. The way you can feel pressure before a storm. Lines of code that hadn't been written yet were already pulling them toward him. Caroline sat in her office staring at the org chart, names grayed out, lines breaking, Empty boxes where there used to be people with context. She thought she'd isolated him. She thought cutting him off would end his relevance. But it just made him impossible to ignore. Now she was the one surrounded by noise. Noise and nothing. Because the loudest part of the company, the one everyone trusted without words, had gone quiet. And everyone who could hear that silence, they were already gone. The call opened with fake cheer. "Thank you all for joining on short notice," Caroline said, her voice just a bit too bright, too polished, like she was narrating a hostage video with perfect enunciation. The Zoom grid was a corporate mosaic of jawlines and power lighting, 15 investors, 5 legal observers, 2 analysts who hadn't blinked since joining, and 1 empty tile marked only as David Stern, former CTO. Caroline powered through the scripted intro. "We've experienced a temporary disruption in our engineering continuity," she said, "but we're already executing on a robust recovery strategy. Our product roadmap remains intact, and we've appointed a new technical lead to ensure forward motion." Wes leaned into his camera, wearing the same confident grin that usually showed up right before a crash. "We're already prototyping alternate architecture," he said. "More modular, more scalable, less legacy clutter." A few investors nodded. Out of habit, more than agreement. Caroline continued. "Obviously, we're navigating some noise from a former employee who opted to pursue other opportunities. We respect that decision, and we wish him well." Click. A new voice joined the call. Calm, dry, familiar. "David Stern here." Everyone froze. He didn't turn on his video. He didn't need to. Caroline blinked rapidly. Wes went pale in a way that suggested he'd just realized which paragraph of the agreement he should have read before getting cocky. David's voice didn't rise, didn't even sharpen. It came through like a courtroom transcript being read over classical music. "Per the auxiliary agreement executed March 2015 between myself, Kevin Berger, and founding counsel, I'd like to enter Clause 14C into the record." No one interrupted. David continued. "In the event of reputational sabotage, humiliation, or malicious interference by internal actors against any core contributor prior to formal transfer of intellectual property ownership, the aggrieved party may reclaim all proprietary assets and launch independent operation without conflict, pending legal confirmation of conditions met." He paused. 1 heartbeat. 2. "Conditions were met on May 12, 9:41 a.m. via public removal from project leadership with defamatory context, as confirmed by recording, board transcripts, and external legal review." Another pause. "I filed activation notice, effective immediately." And just like that, click, he was gone. The silence that followed was not passive. It was the kind that rearranges futures. One of the investors coughed, another looked down, probably texting someone under the table. Caroline tried to speak, but only managed, "That clause, he doesn't have the—" "No," Victor, the lawyer, said quietly. "He does. He has the clause, and the right conditions. You invoked them in front of 87 people. Wes finally found his voice. "So what? He gets to just steal the entire stack?" Victor turned toward the camera, almost amused. "You can't steal what's still legally yours. You handed it back to him." Caroline stood frozen. The words, "We wish him well," echoed back in her ears with a new kind of violence. A lead investor, one of the original seed round heavyweights, finally spoke. His background was a blurred-out yacht. His tone was clear. "He has the high ground. We're exposed." Another voice added, "This isn't just bad optics. This is structural." A younger VC leaned into his mic. "We can't go to market with a platform built on litigated code. Even if we rebuild it from scratch, the smell alone could kill the next round." Caroline finally snapped. "We are rebuilding. He left. He walked out. You think we're gonna let him?" "What?" the man with the yacht said. "Let him win?" The silence that followed was the kind of agreement no one wants to sign. Caroline looked over at Wes, who was now adjusting his collar like it was choking him. He opened his mouth, then closed it again, because what could he say? The man he told everyone was obsolete had just detonated a clause written a decade ago and left them all sitting in the rubble. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't show his face. He just read one paragraph. And now, the thing they feared most wasn't his lawsuit. It was what he was building next. The courier arrived at 8:16 a.m. wearing a windbreaker 2 sizes too big and an expression like he'd rather be anywhere else. He handed the envelope to the front desk receptionist, who stared at the name on it for a full 10 seconds before daring to buzz Caroline's office. "Priority delivery," she said, voice trembling slightly. Caroline didn't look up from her laptop. "Put it on the table. It's from him." That made her glance. She walked to the door, heels clicking like accusations, snatched the envelope and shut it without a thank you. Then she stood there for a moment, the weight of it in her hands heavier than its dimensions suggested. It wasn't thick, it didn't need to be. She opened it slowly, not out of caution, but dread. Like a person realizing the last move in a game was made 3 turns ago and they never saw it coming. First, the formal reversion notice. On official Barrow legal letterhead, neutral language, cold, unemotional text. No adjectives, just declarations. It detailed the complete and final transfer of all proprietary frameworks, code, architecture, documentation, derivations, reverted legally and irrevocably to David Stern, effective retroactively as of the activation of Clause 9 and confirmed under Clause 14C. An inventory followed. She scanned it, realized it wasn't just the platforms. It was every root dependency, every utility script, every logic table they'd built their platform around. The document may as well have been a receipt for the skeleton of the company. Next, a second sheet, Kevin Berger's signature, bold, clear, a notarized declaration. All legacy shares held in reserve for the founder emeritus are hereby reassigned to David R. Stern, including voting rights and strategic veto power. She read it again, slower this time, her lips moving, but no sound escaping. It wasn't just code anymore. It was control. The ability to block mergers, redirect assets, collapse valuations. He didn't just walk away. He circled back and picked up every piece they didn't know they'd left exposed. The final page wasn't legal. It was personal. A memo, plain white paper, no letterhead, typed, not signed, but unmistakably him. "You asked me to apologize to your ex-husband. Turns out I owe someone an apology, but it's not him." No name, no closing, just that. She flipped the page over, hands now visibly shaking. Attached was the new company charter, registered under a new name, different state, David as sole founder, and beneath it, the board members listed in clean Helvetica, all former employees, the ones who'd walked out without a word. She recognized every name. The platform name was different, but the architecture listed in the filing matched the frameworks she'd just lost, matched the lifeblood of her now crippled company. This wasn't a spite project. This wasn't ego. This was infrastructure with direction. He'd filed everything. Trademark, patent tracking, provisional protection filings with USPTO, even a placeholder product roadmap, already more thorough than any she'd forced Wes to draft in his frantic scramble to look useful. Her phone buzzed. It was Wes. She didn't answer. Instead, she walked to the window, looked down at the street. People moved below, unaware that 3 floors up, a woman was realizing she'd lost the very thing she tried to control. Not the code, not the company, but the narrative. She'd framed him as outdated, emotional, just an engineer. But engineers, real ones, build the things people assume will last forever until they stop maintaining them, until the moment they stop answering Slack messages and start reading contracts written in 2015. She sat back down, memo still in hand, and stared at it. "You asked me to apologize to your ex-husband." It echoed now. She remembered that day, the all-hands meeting, the smug smile, the pause before she said it like she was about to do something righteous. She thought humiliation would break him. Instead, it freed him. And now there was no meeting to stop this, no spin to fix it, no Wes to smile through it, no roadmap to delay it, because the man she pushed out hadn't just rebuilt the house. He'd taken the blueprints, the bricks, the nameplate, and left her sitting in the ruins, holding a letter she would never quote out loud. The only thing left in her control was what to do with it. And even that felt like a formality. They didn't fire her. That would have been too clean. Instead, they kept Caroline exactly where she was. CFO in title, exiled in function. Her voice in board meetings became background noise, tolerated out of legal obligation and fear of her severance package. Decisions were made without her, votes cast before she entered the room, strategy sessions she wasn't invited to. The finance team still answered her emails, but only out of procedural necessity, like responding to a calendar reminder you didn't set yourself. Her authority wasn't challenged. It was ignored, quietly, systematically, like someone dimming the lights in a room where the meeting had already ended. Wes fared worse. No announcement, no confrontation, just removal. One day, he walked into the dev floor to check on the rebuild roadmap and found his badge access restricted. HR claimed it was a glitch. A week later, his company laptop required a reset. Then he was untagged from the Slack engineering channels, then stripped from the Git access logs, then quietly unlisted from the company directory. Eventually, he just stopped coming in. He'd show up for lunch sometimes, haunting the cafe downstairs like a man trying to remember where his relevance used to live. He'd smile at interns who no longer knew his name. Once, he bumped into one of the new engineers and offered a tip about the old data structure. The kid just nodded politely and walked away. They'd replaced him. They'd replaced both of them, and they did it without saying a word. 2 weeks after the reversion filing, the company officially froze development on the core platform. 3 investors pulled back. Another shifted their funds toward David's new venture, publicly citing leadership alignment and foundational clarity. Then came the article. It wasn't a takedown piece. That would have been easier to dismiss. No, this was the kind of feature that stung precisely because it was so neutral, so clean, so devoid of gloating. Just facts. Just progress. Legacy reinvented. Former co-founder launches new venture with original IP. Below the headline, a photo. High resolution, studio lit, David standing center. Calm, deliberate posture, no tie, no blazer, just presence. Surrounding him, the 5 engineers who'd left without explanation, and 2 new faces, industry veterans. Big names, names that usually required press releases. David said nothing in the article, no speech, no interview quotes, just quiet acknowledgement that something was being built again. But it was the caption beneath the photo that turned Caroline's stomach to glass. The man who was asked to apologize built what no one could take. No boardroom clapback, no lawsuit, no screaming match in a hallway, just a sentence. And the implication beneath it. He didn't just survive her attempt to humiliate him. He transcended it. He took the shame she tried to pour over him like acid and refined it into something impossible to burn. Caroline sat in her office watching the article on her screen for the 3rd time. She didn't cry, she didn't scream, she didn't even close the window. She just stared and realized finally that the most devastating revenge is the kind that doesn't look like revenge at all. Looks like a man doing the thing he was told he couldn't do, without permission, without noise, without her. They still paid her, still gave her reports to sign, still looped her in on the quarterly budget calls, but no one looked at her the same. Not after the collapse, not after the exits, not after the memo, the charter, the headline. People forgot what her voice sounded like when it wasn't trying to manage a narrative. And she started forgetting too. There was no ceremony, no funeral, no dramatic final confrontation, just quiet. And in that silence, something new was being built. But this time, she wouldn't be part of it.